It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstye Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports business media industrial complex, which seems to be chugging along quite nicely in this back-to-school time of the calendar year. Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. We're recording this on 9/11, so it's a bit of a weird day, and we're not going to get into that here. That's well beyond the scope of a sports business show, of course. So there's that. But yeah, other than this very strange day, I am doing fine. I'm glad to have you back, man. It's been a while. It's been a month.
I know.
You were, had a whole bunch of stuff going on in your life, but I got to say, the audience cannot see this. You look like you fell out of the History Channel show Mountain, man. You really do.
I have a douchier answer than that lead up would suggest, in that I found a new barber who I like the way he styles my beard this way. So rather than just shearing it off and letting it grow back willy-nilly, he's crafted me more the Fitzpatrick look.
Yeah, it's funny that you say somebody's actually styled it, because it looks like it's totally out of control to me.
Oh no, it actually has a little bit of styling here. Although it has been a month since then, so it's probably getting a little crazy.
Oh, but anyway, yeah, no, it's other than the fact that we're recording this on 9/11, it's been fun. Glad to see the NFL football season is back. Thank God. It's been a super long, awful off season, so I'm glad to see football back.
Yeah, and I think you're probably not alone in that, which we'll touch on, and we're gonna kind of do a business state of the league here as we kick off. As Steve mentioned, as we record this, we've got the Thursday night game under our belt to talk about, and there's some juicy stuff there. But by the time you're listening to this, you probably would have had a full slate of college and NFL, and you can see if some of our thoughts continued over that weekend. We suspect that they will. But we're going to start off with a Washington-based story, one that I'm not too excited to discuss. It's basically an update, but the legal problems of Clinton Portis seem to have intensified, and we are streaking towards an endgame here, aren't we, Steve?
Yeah, I always have to beat Chris with a wet noodle to get him to do these athletes behaving badly stories, because he just doesn't like doing them, whereas it's the law, and so I love talking about this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's an update here. So if you recall, go back in the Wayback Machine about a year or so, Clinton Portis, along with 14 other former NFL players, got charged by the feds with insurance fraud and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud, basically. And what they had done was they had falsified prescriptions from fake doctors and falsified invoices for the purchase of equipment in response to the fake prescriptions, and then submitted those prescriptions to something called the NFL Gene Upshaw Player Reimbursement Account, which was managed by Cigna, and it's a CBA thing. And basically, what it is, it's a fund that will reimburse players for medical devices that they need that's not otherwise covered by medical insurance. And so what these yutzes were doing were creating their own prescriptions, creating their own invoices, and submitting them and getting reimbursement. And they were doing it, first of all, anybody, if you ever want to feel the need to try to defraud an insurance company, just know that they have an army of auditors, and you will get caught. And that's, of course, what happened here. It was all kinds of strange stuff, like not even human things, like for horses and all sorts of stuff. So the feds investigated them, charged them. The total scheme was worth about $3.9 million. Clinton Portis' cut of it was apparently just south of $100,000, like $99,000 and change. Robert McCune was in the middle of it, former Redskins linebacker. But the reason why we're doing this now is Portis, along with Tamarick Vanover, if you remember him, went to trial last week. They were the last two standing. Everybody else had entered plea bargains, including Carlos Rogers, former Redskin corner. So strangely, unusually, I should say, the Portis Tamarick Vanover jury, the whole trial took a day. the jury deadlocked. Now, there was clearly strangeness going on in the jury because they deadlocked after only a few hours of deliberation. So we'll probably never know what was going on. But the judge immediately, the very next day, ordered a new trial to start this past Tuesday. So the trial was 2 weeks ago now. Anyway, which is a bit unusual for a court to say, okay, this is going to be retried in literally 2 business days. And so between that time and when the trial started, in order to avoid a second trial starting immediately, Portis copped a plea. So, meaning he entered into a plea bargain. We don't really know what the terms are. We're not going to know what the terms are until sentencing happens, which is January. But the bottom line is Portis and Tamarick Vanover both pled guilty to some number of these medical insurance fraud charges. And they agreed to restitution, meaning that Portis will have to pay back the $99,000 and change. Vanover has to pay back his part. And they will probably go to prison for some period of time, would be my guess. Carlos Rogers got sentenced to a year and credit for time served. So you have to figure Portis' sentence is probably somewhere in that neighborhood as well, but we'll find out. That is the Clinton Portis update. The only other thing with him is now he's got a warrant out for his arrest in Florida for $147 some odd thousand in unpaid child support, which is another problem and another moral failing by a guy who I used to admire and now don't. So that is the Clinton Portis update. If you have thoughts, otherwise, let's move on.
Oh, I have many thoughts. Yeah, I'm really bummed out just because, just from a fan perspective, Clinton Portis is one of my favorite players slash personalities associated with the Washington football team since the glory days. So this is a hard fall. Also, as you said about moral failing, these are, really two crimes, I could probably excuse a lot of stuff for Clinton Portis, but failure to take care of your kids and essentially defrauding your fellow union mate slash ex player, especially in a context of their health, is those are pretty damning things. So I'm just kind of bummed out in general about Clinton Portis. But this was a really interesting last week or whatever stretch of days for this. Not only we'll never know, but something happened in that jury room for sure. I think the foreman he sent a note to the judge saying that it's gotten contentious and basically just call this off because it's going to get ugly. So whatever
it's very
happened
unusual. Listen, having been involved in jury trials, juries don't deadlock in like a few hours. So it's like maybe they were. It's almost like I'm speculating completely here, but were they ready to come to blows over this? Did they hate each other? Could they not even civilly civilly deliberate the trial? It sounds like they could not at all. And it's also very unusual that the court would set a new trial immediately. That almost never happens either. So something was going on with that jury that was highly, highly unusual. So we'll probably never know what happened.
Yeah, and usually a judge, right, or at least common practice would be send them back and say, well, try a little harder after 90 minutes or whatever, right? But this judge was like, all right, let's call it off and reschedule.
Yeah. Like I said, very unusual. So some point, some juror will probably talk, but at the moment, we have no idea. The only one who probably does have an idea is the judge, and the judge isn't talking to us.
Nope. And I imagine Portis's lawyers at that point advised him to, that this wasn't going to end well, and so he quickly took the plea at that point. He's obviously in a desperate situations. Desperate people do desperate things, and his financial circumstances were obviously desperate, and they're not any less so now, because he's also probably looking at a fine on top of the restitution, on top of whatever, with the child support, plus fine, plus prison time. So, it's going to be a tough road for old.
If you go back in the Wayback Machine here a little bit, again, Portis made $43 million over the course of his career. He declared bankruptcy a few years ago, and bankruptcy doesn't necessarily mean you're penniless. What it means is your debts exceed your income and your assets. So we don't know if he literally has no money, but we do know that Portis admitted that he had a lot of his money stolen, and at one point he was contemplating killing the person who did it and was stopped by like a friend. Stopped like heading to do the act by somebody he knew. So things have not gone well. There's a reason Portis is not on the Washington preseason broadcasts anymore, is they didn't want no part of all this craziness, and I can't blame him. But
Which was
Portis has had a lot of stuff go on.
Yeah, which was his probably his final income stream too. Those local Washington media appearances and
No, no, no,
whatnot.
no, no. He's got his NFL pension, which
Well,
is
yeah, I mean, but
substantial.
it was his active employment at that point.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
He's unemployable now. I
yeah,
mean, first of all, he's terrible. He was always horrible at the preseason stuff. He's not a very smart person, doesn't appear to be at least. He was never well spoken. He was never good on camera. So I don't think he had a future in broadcasting anyway, except maybe again the Washington preseason game, just because he was a Washington hero. He can get up there and do nothing and people would watch him. But I don't think he had a future in broadcasting as a whole. Anyway,
Well, now we'll never know.
true.
So there is that. I'm sure we'll check in on this story when the sentencings roll down for I guess to Merrick and Clinton.
Yeah, everybody else is getting sentenced in October. Like including like Robert McCune was the ringleader of this, so he had like 12 charges, I think. And again, who knows what he pled guilty to? But all of that will happen in October, so we'll get a better sense of what Portis is going to get in a few weeks, in like a month.
Yeah, and it to me, no bigger sign of how desperate he might have been that this scam, which was what, south of $100,000 in money in his pocket. That for someone who's was worth 43 million from his playing career, that's chump change, and it shows you just about where the desperation level was.
You want to know the ironic thing is, I know the law firm that he hired, Baker Botts. Baker Botts. I've been on the opposing side of them. I've been in their conference room in their Houston office, which is their headquarters. They're a huge law firm, one of the most expensive law firms in the country. And so obviously they have a white collar crime division, and that's who represented him, at least in part. I can almost promise you that he spent more in attorney's fees than he did in the scheme. I can almost promise you his bill is more than $99,000 from Baker Potts.
Yeesh.
So it's just digging another hole, because they're going to bill out at $500 or $600 an hour, and I know the way they operate, they're going to have more attorneys than it seems reasonable to have on this case. He has a massive bill from this.
All right, well, we'll see about this as the sentences come down. Um, Pretty much the rest of the show, we're going to kind of dedicate to a little bit of the state of the business union of the NFL and really even football in general as it kicks off here in the fall of 2021. And things are looking pretty rosy for the NFL. They're on a bit of a quiet hot streak. If you're paying attention, the biggest data point there was their new TV deals a couple months back. But things have been breaking pretty correctly for the NFL from a business standpoint, and it seems like they're going to take some victory laps this fall. Just a quick data that we can sort of use to jump into this conversation is that they had very good ratings for their Thursday night kickoff. I think their overnights were something in the neighborhood of above 15.5 million viewers, which that's just the pure TV numbers. That puts it at the highest since 2015, and I think on a short list of best kickoffs since they started doing that. It was also the highest watched thing on traditional TV since the Super Bowl, which to me just summarizes everything right there. But then if you start to look at how they track numbers now, which they call DAD, I think.
TAD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is
Tango
basically
Alpha Delta.
yeah, which is basically if you watch it on Peacock or NBC Online or all the various digital outlets, they were looking at something like 26 million viewers for the Thursday night game. Yeah, so right away, the most immediate data says that they're getting an audience back, or they're stabilizing their audience.
Yeah, well, first of all, that acronym stands for Total Audience Delivery, which I'd never heard before, to be perfectly honest with you. I'd never heard that acronym before we started researching this, and so that include yes, it was 26 million. By the way, we're getting this from PFT, which I'm embarrassed to admit. Story posted by Sharian Williams. Sorry if I butchered that name. Cowboys Bucks was most watched kickoff game since 2015. Anyway, yeah. So that number includes NBC TV, Peacock, NBC Sports Digital, and NFL Digital platforms. So that combined number was 26 million. For a reference point, the Steelers Patriots opener in 2015 was up at 27.4. So yes, they did absolutely huge, massive numbers. um, you have to think of the reasons why. Number one, and most importantly, the two biggest draws in the NFL were playing. The Tom Brady, anything to do with Tom Brady, massive numbers. The Dallas Cowboys, as much as we in Washington hate them and their fans and all of that, they are the biggest draw in the NFL by far. And so it's like a nuclear holocaust of ratings in a game like that. Thursday night, prime time, nothing else competing with it on TV at all. That all by itself meant big. But I think the bigger picture here is that the NFL has survived the ratings downturn from a couple years ago and has prospered for a variety of reasons. And you have to think, I think that the rating success Thursday is probably going to translate into Sunday and into the rest of the season. They're not going to always do 26 million. You're not going to get that for, Lions, Jaguars, or whatever. But I think it means that the future of the NFL ratings wise is strong. I think the world, generally speaking, is ready for some sports and ready for some football. There's a lot of awful things going on right now, which again are well beyond the scope of a sports business show. But my point, and I'm not going to get into all that here, but my point is I think the world is ready. Just watch some football, and I think that's sort of what if you could summarize it in a sentence, I think we're ready for some football, to quote Hank Williams Jr.
Yeah, no, I would say all those are definitely key factors in what drives this. And also not only was it, I'm not even gonna say Tampa Bay, Tom Brady versus the Cowboys. It was because ironically Tampa Bay was only the third highest market for the game regionally. But sorry, and a quick aside, and I love that Providence and Boston were in the top 10. People, they still watch Brady,
Still,
yeah,
they still slobber over that guy.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that just kind of was comical to me. But it also was a good 4 quarter game. So it also sustained its ratings. It was a fantastic football game. So like it also, that does matter as well. And when they start to break down the numbers, if it had been kind of a dog game for whatever reason, you would have seen drop off. But this held its audience all the way through the final tick.
Yeah, I for personal reasons had to miss the first half of that game, but so I really only saw the third and fourth quarter. But it was a fantastic game. Came down to the last second. It's literally everything the NFL could have possibly dreamed of.
Yes.
Now I didn't see any of the pre-game festivities in this because again I had to miss this game or the first part of it. So I don't know if the NFL has stated they're going to broadcast what they're calling two national anthems this season. I don't know if that was broadcast or not, if that irritated people or didn't irritate people, or what got shown on network TV. But as I always plead with the NFL, I think the best thing to do, and maybe they did, again, I didn't see it, the best thing to do is just play football, and that's it. Don't get into any of that other nonsense. Just play football. So I don't know what they did, but that would be my advice.
I have no idea because it's just my general practice. I tune in at kickoff.
Yeah, I don't blame you. That's what I do too. I don't watch any. I'm well over any of this pregame shows and pregame stuff. When the ball kicks off, I turn the TV on. That's what I do.
Yeah, if I want commentary, and which I do, I have better outlets to get football dialogue throughout the week and game day than the horrible network broadcast. But the only reason I was somewhat bummed about not tuning in, and I caught up a little bit at halftime, was the debut of Drew Brees and NBC's coverage. Whatever, no big deal. He was fine
I think
at halftime.
Drew Brees, I saw a photo of it, like a still photo of it, and I think the man has a contract with Hair Plugs for Men.
Yeah. Well, hopefully he doesn't get Jim Nance's "I was addicted to hair plugs" problem. Um, uh, so, as you could probably imagine, high ratings and potential high ratings, as people who forecast this stuff were probably predicting, has been driving up ad buys for NFL games and all of all of televised sports, because college football numbers from last weekend were also very strong. You had some of the games. I think there was like one of the highest Big Ten games, the Michigan game of the last like 10 years. So the college football numbers also start to tell a similar story. And we've been talking about for a while that we've seen some of the rebound of some of these, whether it's horse racing or golf or across the sports landscape. So we're really seeing a rise in viewership, and we can talk about that from a few angles. But the NFL apparently is just cannot sell ads fast enough, and NBC, I think it was Front Row Sports, is reporting that NBC is basically already sold at their high dollar amount all of the ads for this year's Super Bowl, which is pretty remarkable. Just a year ago, we were talking about late ad sale problems for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's front office sports. And for those of you trying to find it, gambling boosts network ad sales for NFL broadcasts. And there's several other stories. But yeah, the NFL is, NBC has sold all but cut like a handful of spots for the Super Bowl. Now, we did a story, 2 months ago about how the ad buys for the Olympics were in the tank. NBC had to do make goods. Like the Olympics were a complete and total failure. That is the opposite of what has happened for the NFL for the Super Bowl. Their revenue has increased tremendously. They're not selling ads at a discount. They're selling ads at a premium, and they're all sold out. But a handful, and the season has started Thursday. So it's amazing how that's happened. And again, I think it comes down to what I've always preached. The NFL would be wise to just play football. That's when people watch. They, like Chris said, you have better outlets to get information on football. You have better outlets to get information on politics, on everything. Football, at its heart, part of the reason why the public loves it so much is it is escapism. It's escapism. Let's watch a football game and forget about the ugliness about what's going on in the world right now. And the more they stick to that, the better off they are. And so I think that's why, in part, why people tuned in on Thursday for Patriots Cowboys. It's why they're selling ads. It's why the ratings are expected to increase, because people want to just want to watch football. But so some numbers here, and this is from the Front Office Sports story, and this is by Justin Byers. This is the one I'm reading. There's several, but the one I'm reading is by Justin Byers, September 6th. So the NFL generated $2.8 billion in ad revenue for the 2020 regular season, which was a 3% increase over last year. And they're expected to beat that again this year. Gambling companies are the largest new ad sale category since 2015. We're going to get into that here. But there's been all sorts of partnerships between NFL and gambling. But there is no doubt, if you use ad revenue as a measure of league health, that the league is in outstanding health, I think.
And it's just I think a lot of people, everyone, the public's always a little bit, and this isn't a dig, but it's always a little bit behind the truth on some of these things. So I think people, when they saw these new TV deals a couple months back, were like, but I thought ratings were struggling, or I thought COVID or whatever. They're forward casting this. This is a science for the people that actually do this work at many levels. So those were speculatory at a pretty good rate of return, and they weren't even playing a long game. They were probably playing a middle game, because they knew these things. They know the trends. So if you had any doubts, this just validates why those recent TV contracts, and why the NFL has got a couple new big deals that on the horizon, which we'll get to. So it's showing that all involved from all sides knew what the forecasts were, and we're right about that. But we have to talk about gambling, and I think to a smaller but not insignificant degree, crypto campaigns as two huge new buyers for ad spaces. Gambling obviously has jumped right next to beer, trucks, and entertainment property advertising in terms of the big ticket insurance, those kind of standard ad buy categories now includes gambling almost overnight. And I think it was also front office sports that reported that there's projected to be maybe $1 billion of new ad revenue to football. That includes college, but to football broadcast. That's a big buyer, and which we can talk about in a minute. We already saw on Thursday night crypto ad campaign starring America's sweetheart Tom Brady. So, yeah, those are two new buyers on the block, and that has to be driving up demand and price.
Well, it's especially gambling. Crypto, yes, but it's really gambling. And I know I think crypto and gambling are sort of linked in maybe kind of a broad sort of sense. But I think it's the gambling that's really driving it, And if you recall, the reason for this is that the Supreme Court a couple years ago overturned the federal law prohibiting gambling in every state but a handful. Nevada. What were the other ones? Michigan, I think. There were a couple other two or
Well, New
three other.
Jersey. Oh, actually,
New
not New
Jersey.
Jersey. No, because you couldn't actually. They didn't have legal sports books at Atlantic City. Actually,
Right, but they did. There were casinos in Michigan, but
yeah.
anyway, we did that already. That story a couple years ago. But point is, when the Supreme Court overturned that law, that opened the floodgates to everything. Now, what's interesting is that even a few years ago, 2012, one of these articles we have here, I'll get the site for in a minute, quoted Roger Goodell in 2012 as decrying gambling and the possible impact on gambling on the credibility of the NFL. And that went all totally out the window when the owners realized how much cash is involved. And now we have a team in Las Vegas. We have the NFL's partnerships with DraftKings and FanDuel and a myriad of sports books and casinos in Vegas and elsewhere. They have gone all in. And as it relates to ad buys, a lot of like Chris said, there's categories. There's, you always have beer ads, Bud Light, Miller Light, all those stuff. But the sports books and the sports gambling is just a integral part of the advertising base for the NFL now. And I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I'm not talking, if you want to bet. That's not my point here. But I do think that at some point, this is going to harm the credibility of the NFL. I don't think you can jump full into bed with gambling and not at some point have accusations, accusing the NFL of violating its own integrity for money. That is going to happen, I think, some point, which they'll have to address.
Oh yeah, most likely. I think that it's almost they might probably almost consider it a sunk cost or just a tax on doing business, and it's probably worth it to them to some degree, or they've factored that in and made their deal with the devil, their Faustian bargain for you literary types.
That is what they've done.
Yeah.
That's literally what they've done. They've made a deal with the devil. In the mortal words of Charlie Daniels, who made a deal with the devil to be the greatest fiddle player ever, basically. That is sort of what the NFL has done here with the gambling.
And so, yeah. And so you can just, and that will, which we're talking about the NFL, but, everything that we might talk about, the NFL is the high tide that lifts all boats, generally. It'll all be relative, but if this stuff starts ad revenues up, new buyers like gambling, like crypto, like others, there's always been others that jump in there. When we saw the internet boom, you saw your monsters.com and stuff, right? There's always these kind of lot of money, new buyers that will only continue to grow. We'll see this probably across many different live sports, which also speaks to the fact that, the TV landscape, we talked about this for years, but the TV landscape has changed dramatically. Even the TAD that we talked about is, the Nielsen ratings are starting to understand how to actually calculate their formulas for calculating audiences across platforms has grown significantly more sophisticated even than last year's this time with football. So you start to see that movement, but live sports is still the just absolute playing field for these giant corporations to fight over. And with numbers like this, with eyeballs, you'll start to really see why. And it's why you see these big corporations start to try to lock things down and to try to get this as part of their bundles. So they might have their entire TV archive. You might not watch anything else at its quote unquote scheduled time, but you'll buy buying into their platform because of what live sports they offer.
Yeah. Now remember that the NFL just renewed its TV contracts. Last year, and I believe I'm right in saying that the total value of all those contracts is $89 billion to the NFL. These TV networks and media companies are not paying $89 billion just because they think the ratings are on these games are going to be great, which they will be. It's Chris mentioned the term the high tide lifts all boats. That is what is going on here. So especially the major networks, Fox, CBS, NBC, they use the NFL in particular to boost their entire platform of programming. The NFL is a great lead-in for primetime TV, for example. It draws eyeballs to their networks. It's having the NFL isn't just about we're going to get a big audience on Sunday at 1:00 for Redskins or Washington Chargers. It's about what the NFL does for their entire platform of programming. That's what it's about, especially for the TV networks. And when you see Amazon and all these other platforms get involved, it's the same thing there. Why does Amazon want the NFL? We're going to get into this later in the show. Why does Amazon want the NFL? Well, it's not just because they want to broadcast the NFL. It's they want to draw all these people to their platform. And that is what it's about. And so when you think about the TV contracts and the media contracts, you have to take a big picture perspective on it and understand what having the NFL in particular, way more than other sports. This doesn't really apply to things like basketball and in baseball, hockey, which are chump change from a ratings and audience perspective. It's really the NFL that's driving this. But you have to take into account what having the NFL on their platform does for their entire family of media platforms.
Yeah, I mean, a big nuance difference from probably the old TV contracts to the one they just begun is that they allowed these platforms to broadcast across different mediums. So, and that means that is a driver for new revenue channels for these corporations. So, before they probably weren't allowed to put the NBC games up on Peacock. In fact, Peacock didn't really even exist to most degree, or Paramount Plus, which is CBS. So now I can for $4.99 I can make sure that I can watch the NBC game of the week on any device I have. That's big, right? They're allowed to have this cross-platform experience, and not changing anything about their broadcast. It's just stringing the same broadcast into new mediums. But now it's going to drive someone doesn't have cable or whatever. Yeah, I'll get $4.99 a month to be able to watch the game of the week on NBC or the Sunday lineup on Paramount Plus. So that's a big difference here too, and you can see. Just like we talked about, and has been the case, that NFL drives the fall lineup of the network shows, that's really become largely irrelevant. But what it does do is it drives, they've just changed the call to action, so to speak, from watch, NCIS on Thursday night to join Peacock, join Paramount Plus, check out our library.
That's what I'm talking about. I mean, yeah, the lead-in is important, but what I'm trying to say here is that having the NFL is driving and boosting up their entire platform of programming. That's what I'm saying. Yes, the lead is important on network, but it's really about getting eyeballs to their platforms. Because honestly, I'm as old school as it comes on almost everything, and even I don't watch live TV ever, never. I DVR stuff. You watch it on demand. Almost nothing except live sports is watched in any significant numbers by the consuming audience anymore. And so the networks are taking sort of a big picture, holistic approach to this and saying, okay, we can draw people to our platforms by the NFL, and we're going to draw them into NCIS, whatever, and, to our on-demand platform. I don't even know what network that's on, but if it's on Peacock, for example, and it may not be, I'm making this up, but, we're going to advertise it during the NFL broadcast, or just advertise Peacock in general and get people to look at it. And that's what's driving. That's what the NFL, the network, TV network, media networks are hoping is going to be the payoff for purchasing the NFL broadcasting.
It's funny, the NFL in that scenario is a classic loss leader philosophy that actually doesn't lose you money. The other, so not only that, but also sort of the new media landscape has not only does it enrich in their traditional media contracts, it also opens up new veins for revenue, which I think are really kind of signified by what was this week also signed a mega deal between the NFL and Verizon, and a lot of heating up rumors that Amazon will be the next provider of the NFL ticket. So these are, they've always had the NFL ticket revenue, so that's not necessarily new, but there's whole new lanes that this is opening up too. Do you have the details on the Verizon deal?
Yeah, I do. This is another Front Office Sports story. September 9th, Abigail Gentrup, who we've read her stories before. So this is a 10-year deal worth more than $1 billion. Now, this is not what you think. And I got to be honest, this caught me a little bit by surprise. This is not just a deal wherein Verizon can broadcast NFL games on your mobile phones. This is a lot more than that. This is, it's a technology deal. Okay, they've installed 5G ultra wideband in parts of 25 NFL stadiums, which is up from 13 of them. There's something called 5G Multiview, which is going to allow fans to see, I'm quoting here, fans to see 7 different live camera angles and AR overlays of next-gen stats. Amazon has apparently invested $80 million to support the Super Bowl in terms of camera angles and in this 5G multi-view. There's other technologies that come into play, real-time analytics. So this is not what you think. This is not Verizon gets to broadcast games on your phone. It's Verizon is taking his technology and inserting it into platforms to allow things like next-gen stats, better camera angles, to improving the overall technology of the game. What we see today on your TV or on your screens will not be the same as it is 5 years from now, and that is what this Verizon deal is doing.
Yeah, I mean, just and all of this, remember, just gets added. We've talked a lot about how it's very difficult to lose money as an NFL owner. This is all examples of why. I mean, they're just shoveling multi-billion-dollar contracts into that collective pot here. And, who knows what will happen with the Sunday ticket package. I know that at some point this weekend before Sunday at 1 o'clock Eastern, I'm going to have to do battle with to understand how to relog back in, because it's a horrendous user experience. So I'm stealing myself for that. But we know that the NFL DirecTV will not be that provider. We've talked about that many times. And, Amazon, I think, makes the most sense. And my brain can't really wrap my head around what that deal will be financially.
Yeah, me neither. And I for a variety of reasons refuse, and I will continue to refuse to buy an Amazon Prime membership. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to watch it. I'm gonna have to figure out how to watch these games regardless, because every year I go through this. I live in Texas. Very few Washington games are broadcast in Texas on Sundays at least. So every year I have to figure out how to do this, and what to subscribe to and what not to subscribe to. Do I have to go to a sports bar? Do I have to come up with some website that broadcasts these games for me? Because the NFL still refuses to sell me a package. Since I don't have DirecTV, I cannot purchase a package which will allow me to watch Redskin games or Washington games. So I go through this. But generally speaking, I just think we're going to see a tremendous uptick in the technology and in the numbers. There's going to be real-time reporting of stats as a ticker, almost like if you ever used to watch CNBC, especially on like their stock shows, they've got running ticker tapes all over the screen, that reporting various financial information on the stock market and other things. That's what we're going to see on the NFL, and it all ties back to what we started this show with, which was gambling. It all ties back to all these numbers are gambling numbers. So you got to think big picture here. What is Verizon doing? Verizon's at the cost of what did I say was $1 billion, whatever it is. What Verizon is doing is providing new platforms to data for data and camera angles, but data. What's the data doing? The data is providing information to the public so they can gamble. Why are we doing that? Because the NFL has jumped into bed with every gambling house on the face of the earth at this point. So it's all tied in together, and I really think you have to think what is it going to be like in 5 years? It's going to be the CNBC, the Fox and CBS Sunday afternoon games are going to look like the CNBC stock discussions, on TV from now on. That's what it's going to be.
It'll get to the point. I agree. It'll get to the point where they sell you the clean broadcast as an add-on. Like, they will junk it up to such a degree, and I like some of that stuff because I'm a big fantasy player and stuff, so I get it. It's interesting, but they'll eventually realize there's a market to give people the clean broadcast and upsell you to that.
They will. Yeah, they will. I think the biggest thing the NFL could do for people, and we don't need to dive into the details of, and I don't have them right at my fingertips anyway, the details of the DirecTV contract, but there's been huge lawyers have gotten wealthy over litigation between DirecTV and the NFL, okay? And the single best thing they can do is get rid of it as soon as possible. I think instead of basically turning around and selling it to Amazon, which is what they're contemplating, this is what Chris is talking about here, they would be wise to do what Major League Baseball and the NFL and the NBA has done. They sell their content to anybody who wants it. I have a subscription to MLB extra innings through Xfinity, for example, because my kid and I, we watch different games, but we watch baseball almost every night, and so I pay $40 a month, I think it is, during the Major League Baseball season, so I get every game. I think the NFL, and I haven't crunched any numbers, but I think the NFL would be wise to not just sell it as an exclusive. Sell it to Amazon on an exclusive basis. Sell it to everybody. I think that's how you're going to get more eyeballs on it. I think the Amazon thing is a big mistake.
Well, here's what, and I could very well be wrong, but what I suspect might happen, which would I think would make you happy, and I think a lot of consumers happy because it gives them choice, is I predict they probably don't end up with an exclusivity contract with Amazon. One, Amazon has enough money where they can eat that. I don't know if Amazon would prize that as much because they are looking to expand Prime, which is a whole, whether you like it or not, is a whole bouquet of offerings. So it's not dependent on that. It's already a very successful thing for them. So they're not
Amazon
looking to
could buy the entire NFL.
Yeah,
people need to understand how large Amazon is.
So I think they'll pay to have a version of the ticket and allow the NFL to offer it to cable companies in a similar way. I would not be surprised if they pay top dollar and not get exclusivity.
I hope you're right. I got the sense that they're talking exclusive. I hope you're right, and I hope you're right. I hope I'm wrong, because I think that would be better for the NFL. Because remember, the NFL has the NFL Game Pass. We the Hogs I have a subscription to it. You can watch live preseason. You can't watch live regular season games on NFL Game Pass, except if you're in overseas markets. That's how our buddy Mark Bullock watches Washington games, is through his NFL Europe, whatever, UK Game Pass subscription. And this is sort of what the NBA and Major League Baseball have, as a version of Game Pass that has live games, and that's how I'm watching my Dodgers. That's what the NFL ought to do. They ought to sell it on that platform, sell it through Xfinity, through Time Warner, through Amazon, through Hulu, whatever platform wants to buy it, sell a link to it. I think that's where they could reach the most people, make the most money, personally. An exclusive through Amazon, they'll absolutely do it if Amazon pays enough money, but I just think it's a mistake, and I hope you're right.
Whichever way it falls out, it's going to be another gigantic financial boon to the NFL through another contract. And I just have to take my half cynical hat off to two companies who really did see where this was going, and that would be DraftKings and FanDuel. Because if you remember 7 or 8 years ago, first of all, fantasy football has driven interest in the NFL now for the last 25 years. It was a huge industry on its own. And nobody had heard of quote unquote daily fantasy. It wasn't something that was a part of fantasy football. It was a shortcut to gambling, and it was a long game by the FanDuels and DraftKings to know that a world was coming. So they were conditioning an audience. They were transitioning something which doesn't feel like gambling, which is fantasy football, into something that was a bit of a hybrid between fantasy and gambling. And now, who are two companies sitting at the top of this gambling empire? FanDuel and DraftKings. So when hindsight is 50-50 or whatever Yoga Berra said, but wow, when you look back, you really do see their strategy.
I had someone in my house Thursday night who I watched this game with who was utterly and totally uninterested in the result of the game. He was 100% interested in the impact of this game on his fantasy stats. That was what he cared about. You know, I wasn't what I watched, but there are a lot of people who do that. So I do think if you look back on it, FanDuel and DraftKings really, really had the vision to see what's happening. Now, I like to go back to the point I said before, which is at some point, I think this impacts the integrity of the game. I really do. I don't think you can get this in bed with gambling, with the gambling houses and change the nature of the broadcast and whatnot without having problems. Because, like the NBA had this problem. The NBA had people paying off refs. What was that guy's? You remember the ref's name?
Donahue.
I can't remember. Yeah, him. And he's just one example. But Donahue was taking money from people. There are going to be those accusations. And there are going to be accusations that the NFL is manipulating games, for gambling results, whatnot, and those accusations will come. I promise you. Whether or not they're total nonsense or whether or not they're true, that's going to happen. And there's a certain segment of society that just won't accept. They'll think it's become professional wrestling. There's a certain segment of society that will believe that at some point in the future, and it's coming, I think.
They certainly open themselves up to risk. I'm sure they've calculated the risk, but the risk is there. We sort of talked about crypto as being another one of these, are they one of these main ad buyers? And certainly not to the level of beer or even gambling, but they've come in pretty strong. There's at least two known crypto companies going hard on NFL ads this year, and we saw our first one debut on Thursday night, starring the first time ever that Tom Brady and Gisele Bundchen, I think, have been featured in something together in the media. So
is that true?
Yeah,
really?
Yeah. So it was like their first sort of joint thing. They're actually investors. They're equity owners of FTX. So they're not just pitch people here. They're also benefit directly from the success of the company. But high gloss, high profile, quite frankly, very well done ad. Lots of jokes, lots of inside things, lots of NFL connections. Really fascinating on a couple levels. One, Steve, did you know that the NFL actually bans all cryptocurrency connections to the league? That's one of their Protect the Shield things. So this is all funneled through the network. And it is actually a little bit interesting parallel story to gambling because that's how the NFL acted for a while and then just did the full adoption. So you wonder if this is going to follow a similar path. But also
Yes.
a company called Crypto.com has actually got a big ad deal with Fox that you'll start seeing over the course of this fall. So super interesting here. Super interesting Tom Brady. And by the way, if we're tweaked to invest in crypto as a U.S. Citizen, you will immediately find you got a couple hurdles to make.
Yeah, I missed the ad live, but I watched it before the show here, and it is a very well done ad. It's FTX appears to be a marketplace for crypto.
Yeah, it's just
basically
it's a brokerage.
Yeah, that's what. But yeah, I logged into it or went to the site right before the show, and it immediately directed me, had a warning label that said you're in the U.S., so you have to go to this other site because of the regulations. Because this is a whole nother podcast topic, but the federal government is desperately trying to regulate cryptocurrency for two really financial reasons. It's one, They think it's going to hurt the value of the dollar because crypto has a potential of crypto is unregulated currency basically, and then two, for tax reasons. Because it's pretty easy to dodge having to pay taxes if you are investing in cryptocurrency. So for that reason, and the government is desperate to spend every dollar it can print, and so that's why they don't like cryptocurrency, and that's why there's a whole separate U.S. thing for FTX. But yeah, I don't. I think it's only a matter of time for the if the NFL has proven anything, it's that they have no morals whatsoever when it comes to getting in bed with whoever, as long as they can make money. Because again, it was just 2012 that Roger Goodell was decrying the link between gambling and the NFL, and 9 years later, they're having a threesome, with gambling, So that would it surprise me in a couple years that the NFL is all in bed with gambling or with crypto? No, it will happen. It's only a matter of time, I think. But it was very well done, ad. Yes.
And just look at star power. You have the league's oldest, most successful quarterback all in, and you've got the potential next great thing in Trevor Lawrence, who we've discussed in previous times, also all in on crypto in terms of many different layers. So your youngest QB star and your oldest QB star, and when you have individual players like that pushing, as well as the industries, it's going to get interesting.
Listen, yeah, little Tommy Brady. I mean, he's got a major following, and he's got charisma, and the ad worked very well, and Giselle's obviously a model, so she's fun to look at, and she did well in her presentation of the material too, and I think that ad is only the beginning. There's going to be a tidal wave until our horrible, awful United States federal government figures out a way to ban all this stuff. There's going to be a tidal wave of crypto in coming years, and the NFL will be all in, I think.
Yeah, in terms of tax shelters, cryptocurrencies are definitely the new Cayman Islands, if you understand the reference.
Yes.
So obviously, now we also know that the NFL is a week-to-week league, so we could be talking about fallout of all these topics to some degree, even before we eat turkey at Thanksgiving. So with that caveat firmly in place, looks like the state of the NFL as it kicks off this season is pretty good financially.
Financially, they're rolling in dough, man.
Yeah.
The ratings blip from a few years ago is over and past and gone, and they're doing gangbusters again. The NFL's proven to be one of the most Teflon properties in the country, in terms media properties in the country. Yeah, there seems to be nothing that can defeat the NFL. They might have their ups and downs, but ultimately, their tract is, if you do the derivative of the sine wave of the NFL, it's always up.
Yeah.
to have a calculus reference there.
Good way to cap that. So I will obviously be doing lots of NFL stories as we proceed into the change of seasons. But Steve, in Hogstye land, there's probably a lot going on because if we just think about what's going on the field. So what's the fall schedule for the Hogstye?
Well, we're gonna have our 2 shows per week. And believe me, it's a grind to get through them for sure, especially when Washington is, by the end of it, they're out of it and we're still doing this. But we enjoy doing game analysis far more than the off-season talk. And so we're looking forward to it. But we will have game previews on Thursday. And we will have game recaps on Monday. We have Seasons of Discontent. By the way, Rick Snyder put on Twitter that he had some health problems recently, and our buddy Rick Snyder, and our best wishes to him and his family. Well, I'm sure he'll be back soon. Whenever that show gets back, we'll have Seasons of Discontent and all of our regular written content, game previews. We have Dave Earl's fan reaction columns. We've got a lot of stuff going on. We've got our buddy Nolan from Tampa tracking penalties on a weekly basis, which is always fascinating. So check us out.
All right. Well, hopefully you'll have an interesting season to talk about. You're not making things up by week 10, or just wallowing in horrible losses.
It's more of that. We could, by the end of it, usually I could almost run a prior show and sub in different team names, and it would be the same.
Yeah,
that's what we've had in the past.
Totally. So hopefully this year will be a more fun season to talk about from a Washington football team perspective. And here as we sit just a couple, a handful of hours before kickoff, and you've heard it after the results, but hope springs eternal. If you're a fan of a football team right now and you don't predict 17-0, then what are you even doing? All right, so we will see you in 2 weeks.